So when it comes to logo design, we have lots of different places this logo needs to work. It needs to work in a square format, a horizontal format, and a vertical format. You have digital icons, you have social media posts, you have large banners. So it needs to look good in a lot of different ways. And we have this typography. This lockup looks really good, and I like the balance of it. But unfortunately, it's not going to look good in a square because you have this longer name. So we need to have different variations of the logo to be able to be flexible on a lot of different situations. So now's the time we can present maybe some of these raw ideas to the client and say, okay, here is the genesis of my idea. I wanted to stay with, you can even show them your word map. You could show some raw sketches. You could talk about the process that you went through to come up with it and say, what idea or concept do you feel like resonates best with your brand? And you're going to get some initial feedback. This is where you need to start to bring in the client because you don't want to give them something final and they decided they didn't like your choice. And then you did all that work for nothing. So it's good to check in with the client and say, okay, now what? Where should I go from here? Because we have these 4 options. We need to reduce this at least down to 2. Or 1 would be preferable, but if the client likes a second one, we can continue to refine that. So let's say we got back with the client and they decided that this reminded them a little bit too much of a photography logo. They didn't like the complex nature of it. They wanted something more simple. They eliminated that option. And this kind of helps us. Now we don't have to adapt this logo 3 different ones. We can only adapt maybe 2. They also wanted to take a pause on this one. They felt like they really liked it, but it looked, they kind of like the idea of the growth and the leaf and then the strength and the triangle and the geometric shape. They felt like with the gold color, maybe that would maybe work a little bit better. So they're just slowly eliminating, but I'm not done with this because I think this has some potential. I'm just going to slide, instead of deleting it, I'm just going to slide it over. You never know when I might be able to use that for another project. You never know. So there's like a cool M, and I don't know, just don't know when you'll be able to use that little shape. That can even become a pattern. Who knows? I'm just going to kind of keep that asset out there. So now we only have 2 to adapt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, I just kind of select it all. I'm going to hold down Option and drag to create a duplicate. And this is when we need to create our different variations. So now we need to create a horizontal version to work really well in website headers, maybe the top of a mobile website, something very horizontal that'll fit nicely in those spaces. I'm going to try to keep the symbols the same size since we already determined that we like the balance of that. So what we could do is we can easily toggle on our grid. I'm just going to go up to View and go down to Show Grid. And we can match this up just to make sure we have some nice structured spacing. You don't have to use the grid, but I find it pretty helpful. So all I'm doing is I'm just lining it up to this box, and I'm just going to bring this and I'm just going to make sure, maybe there's a specific box spacing between them. So there's 4 spaces width of the M. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so you can see. There's just 4 boxes there, the specific determined spacing. And let's say we want to replicate that same spacing between the word and the symbol just to have consistency. It doesn't have to be this rule, but that seems like that would be a nice rule to follow in terms of spacing. So both of those elements are 4 boxes apart. And this is another kind of Goldilocks situation where we can have too much space and too little space. So this would probably start to feel pretty disconnected. And this will start to feel anxious. Those are competing with each other quite a bit. So just trying to find this middle of the road. I know it's hard. It's something you have to train your eye to find. And of course, you could do tricks like spacing and keeping spacing consistent by finding certain themes with your spacing and sticking to that. So if you don't have that eye trained yet, you can use the grid as a helpful guide. Same thing for this. We can even line this up the same way and do 4 and 4 spacing. We also want to make sure we have the same spacing. This is when we have to do some optical adjustments. So if I were to align this perfectly on the grid, you have this little thin leaf stem part coming down. And so if I align this perfectly in the center, so let's say this entire thing spans, let's see, there's the bottom, And there's the top. So just trying to, and there's 4 spacing between the sides. So just trying to align it. If I were to align this perfectly in the center, this object, it would probably be right here, because this stem is counted as part. The computer doesn't know that this whole object is really heavy on the top but really thin on the bottom, so it looks like it's really top heavy, even though this whole object as a whole is aligned perfectly. So this is where we need to start to make our own adjustments, not based on the computer but based on how it feels, called optical adjustment, because that stem is going to make everything look top or bottom heavy. So just making some quick adjustments, and I'm going to toggle off my grid, and now we have a horizontal version, we have a vertical version. We can even see how what's great about having an icon that's got almost like a square shape to it. If I ever wanted to duplicate this, and I'm going to do a perfect square, so I'm just doing the rectangle tool, and I have it on a stroke. I'm going to hold down shift and drag to get a nice dimensional box. So this is going to emulate, let's say, a Facebook icon or any kind of square icon, maybe a Instagram story, which is a perfect square. If I want to put my little brand or icon on it, what's great about it is it's going to fit pretty nicely in that box, just like this. So just kind of testing out our little symbol so that we know it works really good in a square orientation. And same thing, we're just kind of trying this out. Just kind of hold down Option, drag, just getting a copy, and then seeing how it looks in a square orientation, because you're not going to be able to fit that big long name in a square, that especially a small icon. So sometimes that's what's great about having logo symbols or logo marks along with typography, is you have a lot of flexibility. It's not required. You can have just a typography based logo, but it does make it easier to adapt it in spaces like this. So I'm just going to organize this a little bit because it's a little disorganized. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of categorize. These maybe do it in columns. That might be the easiest way to align it up. And notice how my smart guide's on, so it's clicking and then kind of helping me line things up quickly. And there's our little icon. So just starting to kind of have our final 2 together. We're going to be creating a business card, perhaps a letterhead, creating watermarks. We're just going to do a little bit of branding. We're not going to do the entire branding process because that would be a whole nother class to itself. Just giving you a really nice head start and thinking about presentation and branding. Okay, so we have some good options here. And now it's time for the next step. It never seems to end, but logos need to work everywhere. So we have sizes down, but now we need to do background color. So this looks great on white, but how does it look on color? How does it look on black? So we're going to make sure this logo can look good on a very dark background and look very good on a really white background. So we're going to do that next. So let's get started. I'm going to create a new artboard. So I'm just going to go up to File. I'm going to go up to Document Setup and go this little thing called Edit Artboards. And we're just going to edit our artboard. We have this little artboard right here. We want to be able to make a duplicate artboard so we can have one that's on a white background and one that's on a dark background. So I'm just going to go up to this little addition right up here on the top and just add a new artboard. It's going to automatically add one the same size. If I want to change my size of my artboard, I can go right up here in this top area and I can change the size of my artboard, or I can just resize it like this. If I decide to do a whole branding campaign and I have lots of different artboards, I can do that as well. Especially when it comes to exporting your logo, you're going to probably want a lot of different sizes. And so you could just create different artboards, different sizes of your logo, and then you can go and export these. So if I don't want an artboard, I select it and just press delete. You can go up to File, Export, and you can export this as a JPEG, a PNG, a PDF, and it'll export each artboard as its own image, which saves so much time when it comes to exporting your logo. We'll get to that in a little bit. So let's go ahead and duplicate everything. Just hold down Option. And we're going to put everything on a dark background. So I'm just getting a rectangle tool and I'm just going to draw a dark background. Let's do kind of not quite black, maybe just like a dark gray to kind of indicate different shades of color a little bit easier than just stark black. So now we need to highlight everything And to make life a little easier, I am going to put this on a new layer. So I'm going to go over to my layers panel right here, and I'm just going to add a new layer. And I'm going to take this background square, I'm just going to cut it. So I'm going to go up to Edit, Cut, or you can use your keyboard shortcuts. I'm just cutting that out, and I'm just going to paste it on the new layer. And I could do a paste in front, and I'll paste it right back where I cut it. And I'm just dragging this underneath. I am just creating a locked layer here, just so I don't accidentally move this black background when I'm using and adapting these logos. So I just have this all on one layer and just have this kind of locked so that I don't accidentally move it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select all my items. I'm going to make it all white. I have a mixture of strokes and fills. So I may have to hand select some of these. So let me go ahead and I'm going to do a little trick to get this all to go to white. I am going to go to Edit. You can take each individual selection, because some of these are strokes and some of these are fills. So that's a fill because it's typography. So I can sit here and make everything white, and sit here and just like go like this and go through here and make everything white. I can do a little trick though, and I can select everything, go up to Edit, Edit Colors, and there's something called Invert Colors, and it's going to take everything that's dark and flip it around. So I'm going to do Invert Colors, and just like that, it took all the black and made it the opposite, which will be, in this case, white. And so just like that, we have this. Let's go ahead and make these strokes a white color so we can see how icons will look. So that was, it's fairly quick. If you have a more complicated logo, that right now this is just simple lines and shapes, and so it adapts super easily to a dark background. We don't have to do any modifications. But sometimes you have really complicated logos with gosh, I hope you're not using photos, but some people do photos and more complicated objects. And when that happens, when you try to adapt it to a darker color, there's fills and things and colors you have to kind of think about. But when you have a really simple shape like this, and this is why I encourage people to make logos as simple as you can, because it makes it easier to adapt it to all sorts of different situations. So we're starting to kind of have a nice library of choices here. When we do develop our brand materials, we'll be able to grab some of these logos and pop them onto our branded materials really easily. So one thing is missing, and that is starting to work with color. And for this section of the course, I'm not going to go super in depth in terms of color selection. We already talked about color psychology and other theory lessons, but I really want to kind of just work with colors the client has already highlighted, which is the gold color. They really like the gold color. So in the next lesson, we're going to approach color, start to adapt that, and see if we can't get this from 2 options down to just 1 for the client to make it easier to start to do our branded materials.